I'm Jane Justus, and I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my story and my beautiful son, Guy Justus's story. He was born October 8th, 1993, and he was a blessing in my life, and his father's life, and his sister's life. He passed away June 10th, 2019, after a fatal relapse. What he thought was heroin ended up being laced with fentanyl. His final year of life was actually pretty good, all considering. He had been relatively stable. He battled not just substance use disorder, he also battled severe mental illness. Starting really when he was a younger boy, I'd say, I think he was first diagnosed with depression and anxiety when he was still in elementary school. By the time he was middle school, we had some learning disabilities, and when I say that, very intelligent, verbal, and very intelligent. He just had dyscalculia and various issues like that, visual, spatial, on the autistic spectrum. Not so that you would notice, but he knew it and felt very awkward. He was so lovely. And later on, he would become diagnosed with schizophrenia. Through the course of that, growing up, Guy was prescribed as a young boy. He was misdiagnosed with ADD, the non-hyperactive ADD, but they still prescribed him with the Ritalin. And being that mom, the early 2000s, I didn't question much. His teacher said he needed this. So back then the doctors prescribed this. That led to some more quirks and tics and what have you. The anxiety got worse. He was prescribed benzodiazepines by a psychiatrist. Again, I love it when people say, I'm being facetious, of course, but they had a choice. Well, no, I thought I was being a compliant parent by giving my child these medications that were prescribed. Little did I know what was happening. And so the final, I hate to say it this way, but it's really true, nail in the coffin, when he turned 15, he was already feeling pretty awkward. And being overprotective parents like we were, trying to make things a little bit easier, although it really just wasn't easy for Guy, on top of everything else. But he got a staph infection when we were on a cruise, and in Broward County, Florida, he was given an IV of morphine. Instantaneously, he felt different, and then sent home with opiates. Take as directed. So IV him up, make sure they were in my possession, make sure he's not able to just, but I'm giving him these, not realizing that his brain and those opiates connected like that. And then a month and a half later, wisdom teeth extraction. Again, the opioids. So by the time he was a freshman in high school, I'm really unbeknownst to his father and I, we had a drug problem. So the first inkling we had, when he was about 15, family, friends that he grew up with, he hung out with two young men that were really nice kids. They were brothers, and he had been to their house, and they had gotten a hold of some marijuana, and so they were smoking that there, and that was a shock. And of course, naturally, the wrong thing to do, and what I did was, how could you do this to me? That no one uses drugs to hurt people around them. It's what's going on internally. So the main advice I would give parents reading this: take yourself out of this equation, as take your ego out of it. This is about your child. So being the hyper vigilant, overreactive person I was, boom, you're gonna go for some right away. We're gonna get you to your therapy, and we're gonna talk about that. We're gonna get on this. And then the second huge, the major thing, we got a heads up that he had been crushing opioids, and he was probably getting them, don't know exactly where, but he was probably getting them from people at school selling them, from their parents' cabinets. We didn't have any at our house. And so naturally overreactive, but I thought what I was doing right, and I'd still do it again, but I got him into Fairbanks, got him into a program, and I guess what I would say is he wasn't in there long enough, but I didn't know that. And this is still early. We're talking, graduated in 2012, so we're talking about 2009, maybe 2010, somewhere around there. And he had been in the stress center too, or he had suicidal ideation. So we're talking a couple stints already before he graduated high school. But like most parents at that time, and I really need for you out there to listen to this, moms and dads, in my mind, I kept thinking, at least the pills. At least it's not heroin. Can I emphasize the opiate and the way it is administered doesn't matter. The brain doesn't care. The heroin comes later, after the price is too extreme for the opioids, what have you. No one, well, some people maybe, but in the case of my son and many others, it starts from what we think is a harmless prescription drug prescribed to them. Never in a million years did I think this would happen to my son. He was so cautious, the easiest little boy, the things I had worried about. He wasn't particularly athletic, and but he made up in other areas, and he had to try hard at school, and he had some anxiety and depression issues, but he was loving and he wanted to do everything right. And you could see the drugs and the mental illness kind of kicking in. You could see kind of looking down the corner of his eyes. Things were happening. I would say his father and I were a little in denial about that getting as bad as it was. I was, in the back of my mind, I knew something more, and so did his dad. But we were hoping and praying. We were getting him therapy, getting on medicine. He'd already been on antidepressants, etc., which were helping some. He also had a bad thyroid. So there were these things we were trying to make sure. He had issues with his blood sugar, insulin resistance, always the borderline between diabetic and pre-diabetic, so there's a lot going on. It's just so much I think I wish we could have done differently, but then going back, I don't know how I would have, I don't know if I would have known to do it any differently. I mean, if I had the information that we know now, because I feel like I've always been pretty, what's the word? Overly vigilant about things. I mean, I always worried about an alcohol problem occurring with one of my children because of there's a family history of alcoholism. I must say, I don't think any doctor meant to harm my child. And any parents out there, I don't think they meant to harm my child. I mean, I surely didn't mean to harm my child. I meant to protect him. Obviously, when you lose a child to addiction, there's a lot of self-blame. And I will say that with dual diagnosis, it's a whole different bird. This isn't the tough love that we gave. You've got to be careful with that. You have to know what you're dealing with. We did all that. When you're dealing with someone, particularly on the spectrum, words are taken literally. You've got to be really careful with what you're saying. You could break someone very easily, unintentionally, emotionally. And I would say my husband and I, not meaning to, would break his spirit. I know other adults broke his spirit. This child was broken. And as an adult, he was broken. Got through high school, made it through his core 40, and through all these struggles. And so guy really wanted to go away to college. So against her better judgment, he was already 18. He got accepted. We allowed it. By his second semester, we had to get him, and he had also gotten into some legal trouble. So once that started, guy became, like I said, words matter, so he became, in his mind, what people wanted, what they thought wanted him to be. So the addiction and the mental illness, those two put together, so hard. It was very difficult to get these two balanced. And he tried hard. We tried. I guess the thing that my husband and I didn't learn soon enough, particularly with the opiate use disorder, the nature of this disease is relapse and recurrence, or relapse and remittance. It's just, that's the nature of this disease. So this is normal with this. It often takes many attempts at rehabilitation to go into long-term recovery, add a mental health issue with it. It can be done, but we need to change how it's done. And unfortunately, us as parents, we don't have much of a say. By the grace of God, our son didn't become one of the people you see downtown, homeless and on the streets, but all you need to do is go downtown and see a lot. That probably would have been my son, in another 10 or 20 years, had he lived. You think of schizophrenia, for example, we know the brain shrinks. We know it's neurodevelopmental, but we also know it's neurodegenerative. So we're asking it amazes me that we're expecting people with these diseases to be able to make rational choices when they're not being medicated. And then we're criminalizing instead of providing the long-term treatment they need. It's very hard to watch someone you love disintegrate in front of you and then you can't do anything. And there were times during the depths of this when, just as a parent, I didn't want to wake up and watch him suffer. It was so hard, heartbreaking. There were years of ambiguous loss. I was so thankful he was here, and at the same time so sad of his existence, because half the time it was violating probation because he couldn't stay clean, because he would think he was okay and go off his medication, and it was just a constant battle. And so seeing your child behind a pane of glass, which felt like an awful long time, it seemed like it spanned 3 years between the time he was 19 to 24, where off and on where I was visiting him between glass, often for, I think the longest was 11 months. And the other side of it was I was thankful he was alive, but gosh, I just kept thinking, why can't he be in a place where he's actually getting real help? You know, why can't we take these long months and get him stabilized with medication? So Guy's final chapter, he had gone off his psych meds, and that caused him to go off of his Suboxone, which I think for anyone Guy's age that starts that young on opioids, I firmly believe it should be almost like an insulin to diabetics. As low a dose as possible, but I think maintenance, that Suboxone was saving his life, and he was functioning. He wasn't high. He was working. He was happy. The key was, went off the psych meds, went off the Suboxone. He had a fatal relapse. So not a day goes by where, really not an hour, where I don't miss him and I don't think of him. And I just hope that some of the advice, I hope it's advice, I hope Guy's story helps one family. First of all, don't be ashamed of their disease. It's a disease. They didn't ask to become addicted. They didn't, and they didn't ask if there's mental illness involved. This is something they can't control. It's not a state of mind, it's a disease. So you have to treat this like you would a cancer. You wouldn't be ashamed of a cancer. Why would you be ashamed of your child's mental illness and addiction? You can be ashamed of the behavior, but you can't be ashamed of the person with it. Number 2, this is a family disease. In order for that person to have a chance, the whole family must get help. You have to find a therapist for the whole family. Okay. My suggestion is individual and family therapy. Per your resources, I know there's places out there where you can get this at low cost to none. And there, maybe check Overdose Lifeline.org, and I'm sure they could steer you to some resources. It's helped me. I'm thankful that I had this prior to my son's passing. We had a really good relationship. The last thing we text each other, actually the last thing I said to him is I love you, and he loved me too. But the morning text was an I love you, both exchanged, and what a gift. because living with someone that battles addiction is frustrating. And you do feel like it does take a lot out of you, a lot out of your life. But you have to remember it's not that person. And when I say this, though, this is from my mother's perspective. It's different for siblings, and I would have to say there's no reason for a child to be subjected to this. So as a mother, it's different. I'm going to do everything I can on top of getting myself treatment, but I'm not ever going to give up on that child. That doesn't mean I'm enabling. I'm not giving money. I'm not doing these things to support his habit. But if my resources allow it, especially when there's a mental illness, I'm going to do my best to make sure he has his treatments. And I'm going to make sure he has at least the basic needs, his basic needs met. His food, his medicines, his clothes, a roof, however I can do that. With children involved, I will repeat this. Children should not be a pawn in this, because it's hard enough for a parent and an adult sibling to manage this. Children have no business being involved in this. It's traumatizing, and like I said, it's a family disease, and the sooner they can get into therapy, the better. Hope one day they can all be involved when there's recovery, but children have no business being involved in this. Got to break this cycle. And fortunately, there's a camp that Overdose offers for children involved in this. So make sure to go on that website and look. It's really a phenomenal thing. But if I had to do it all over again, I would. The best thing that ever happened to me is, well, both of my children, but my son made me a kinder, more humble, more open-minded person. This is mom that was pretty much never tried these things. I didn't know what to look for. Pretty judgmental about it. I was pretty judgmental about people that used drugs recreationally, and really even people that, I was judgmental, period. And I think God used my son as a vessel, teaching me the humanity of people like my son and what beautiful people they are. And these other people that you see on the streets, they might not look beautiful to you right now, and their actions, when they're really out of whack, can not be so pretty, but these are someone's babies, and at one time in their lives they had dreams. And I hope you can remember that. And I encourage everyone out there to get naloxone, learn how to use it. Even if you don't have anyone impacted, you have a chance to save a life. And we can't save a life if they're not, we can't even get them to recovery if they're not breathing. It's imperative to keep your medication and your children's medication. Well, we know this anyway. Even if it's baby aspirin, you want to keep it out of reach of children, right? But, if you have medications that are given specifically for pain, anxiety, sleeping, First of all, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychiatrist, but my first choice would be, don't use those pain pills as directed. Use them just for the time you need them, just right after the fact. That's my opinion. And then either take them to a drop box or dissolve them in vinegar. However, your pharmacist gives you the tips on how to dissolve them, or ask your doctor specifically to only prescribe you the minutest amount after a procedure, maybe a day to 2 worth. You know, your insurance may not cover it. They may not like to do that. But you can do your part and maybe stopping the spread of this addiction. Maybe those pills not getting into the wrong hands by this specifically. It's huge. So for me, I before they had drop boxes, I mean, I wanted them dissolved. I wanted them out of there. So I did. I just did my own thing. I would pour them in vinegar, get rid of them. Just make sure they were diluted so that there was no potency, and out they go. But ask your pharmacist the best way. Ask them if they'll even take them back. And if you can, find a drop box. I think most of the sheriff's departments have them. They're a great thing. I'm happy to talk about my son's story, but I'd much rather be talking to you about all the cool things he's doing, maybe the kids he might have. Another point that I'd like to make, there's probably throughout a month's time, there are at least 5 to 6 people that reach out to me, private message wise via Facebook, or people who have my cell phone number, and they ask for help, for resources. And I'm so thankful to know Justin Phillips and the people through Overdose Lifeline, and some amazing people in the recovery community. There's, lots of wonderful people. I could go on for days listing the wonderful people just right here in the community. There's Daryl Mitchell, the Progress House. There's so many, but Justin Phillips is just an amazing resource of knowledge. And one of the things they're doing is Camp Mariposa. I have a lot of people come to me, and there's also children involved in their family situation. And they don't stop to think about the children. And even afterward, they still aren't really, they think, oh, I think she's okay. They probably will never do drugs because they see what it's done to this person. Okay, what I want to tell you on that is 6 weeks after my son died, my husband's beloved older sister died. She had opioids prescribed to her the day before she died. They were all around her, OxyContin. My son watched his aunt struggle with mental illness and addiction his whole life and never wanted to go down that path. Please don't assume because your child sees this, they're going to be perfect and fine. It does traumatize family people, and there is a genetic link to addiction. You owe it to them. The family as a unit owes it to them. First of all, to make them understand that in no way are they responsible for any of this, and knowing that they are wonderful and have so much going for them, and that they're loved so much that they deserve to get all this extra attention from this therapist and this camp. And one great one is Camp Mariposa, offered through Overdose Lifeline. I can't say enough about the people running that, and all the people who've gone to such great lengths to make that available to the community of Indianapolis. It's take advantage of it. It's no cost. And I wish it would have been a resource for my children. I wish I would have had the wherewithal mentally to know that my kids needed that younger. I wish I would have had the knowledge to realize that I needed therapy so much sooner than I started it. Not just for me, but for the benefit of my children. Take advantage of these opportunities. Also, Overdose Lifeline offers, for anyone who's grieving like myself, they offer resources for specifically for grieving families. Take advantage of that. It's free. There's a resource counselor. Take advantage of it. It's a great thing. And I guess if you're a family member with addiction of any sort, learn about the addiction. Learn that, for example, if your mother, brother, sister, child has alcoholism, they can't go off that addiction cold turkey with alcoholism. They need to be in a treatment. That's one disease that can kill them if they go cold turkey. Learn about this. Learn about the disease of addiction. Learn about how the way you handle this can affect your mental health and how it could impact their recovery or lack thereof of recovery. You have to treat yourself in order for the person suffering from those diseases of addiction and or mental illness to have a chance at recovery. At the end of the day, you owe it to yourself and them to do your very best, and doing your very best is taking care of yourself.